that's not what we're going to find when we go tour the Delta. Although I think it is also beginning to change. The reasons for that are hard to say. Partly, it has been the result of an indefatigable journalist in Jackson named Jerry Mitchell, who has, over a period of almost 20 years now, more than 20 years, continually unearthed details about violence directed against civil rights workers that has led to the prosecution of more than 20 people for murders committed against civil rights workers. And in the process, exposing a new generation of Mississippians to an aspect of their history that had largely been, if not erased, then at least not much talked about. There is, as you know, a new state legislative mandate to encourage the teaching of Mississippi's civil rights history in our public schools. An unfunded mandate, but a mandate nonetheless. There are plans for the creation in Jackson of a civil rights museum. A building that ironically will stand on the same site as where the office of the State Sovereignty Commission, which we're going to talk about a bit later, once stood. There are now routinely anniversaries, commemorations, memorials. Some of the most extraordinary that I have experienced have been in Macomb, Mississippi, as it happened. And there are more to come, because next year is the 50th anniversary of Freedom Summer. And whether you guys know it or not, the nation's journalists are about to descend on you yet again to write an endless number of articles about how Mississippi has and hasn't changed. Journalists, and don't get me started on journalists, but I think here's another controversial statement, but it's coming from the other political direction. Northern journalists love nothing more than feeling morally superior to Mississippians. This isn't, I should tell you what my own research is about. I'm writing a book on Mississippi and on movement in Mississippi, and specifically the events of 1964. But it is not a book that focuses so much on what happened in 1964 as it is the ongoing, continuing struggle over meaning and memory. How we tell the story of what happened here. What stories we choose to remember. What stories we choose to forget. I'm interested, to put it in more academic jargon, in the making of historical narratives. And we make narratives. As one of my favorite bands, the Drive-By Truckers, says, the secret to a happy ending is knowing when to roll the credits. So if you want to tell the story of the Mississippi movement and end in 1964 with the Civil Rights Act and 1965 with the Voting Rights Act, you can tell a pretty happy story. If you want to let the reel run a little longer, it gets more complicated. We'll talk about that. Whether or not you've been aware of it, I've been trying to set this problem of historical memory and how we represent the past up over the last 2 years. That's why we've been visiting historical sites like Monticello, or Harper's Ferry, where John Brown led his raid, or the battlefield at Antietam, the 150th anniversary of which is today, which prompted the Emancipation Proclamation. And will any of our political candidates mention that? It'll be interesting to see, won't it? What stories we tell, what stories we elect not to tell. My point simply is that history in this sense is political. Because the way we tell the story of the past orients who we are in the present. What we're going to be talking about here, I think, in talking about the Mississippi Freedom Movement, is a perfect site for this kind of self-reflexive work. For work that looks at once at what happened, but also reflects on the various ways of trying to tell that story and the continuing uncertainty and difficulty people have here and elsewhere in knowing how to tell that story. And I think the Mississippi Freedom Movement, again, is a powerful way of doing it because it was a much, much more radical movement than most of us imagine. And to that extent, it was a movement whose success was much more attenuated than most of us imagine. It was a movement not only about who gets to sit at a lunch counter or in a classroom, but who gets to vote, and even more broadly, who gets to participate in the political process as a full citizen. The issues that we're going to be talking about are inescapably controversial. And they are particularly so this year, this fall, because we are living through a presidential election, and I do not doubt that people in this room have very different opinions about that presidential election. Those of you who know me know that sometimes I have a hard time not editorializing. I'll do my best. I think all of us need to work very, very hard to be civil, because some of the stuff we're going to be talking about can go off the rails pretty quick. I'll give you an example. There are 30 states in the Union right now, roughly, that have or are contemplating some form of voter identification. I, as someone who has spent the last 10 years of his life researching a popular movement in Mississippi in which people died to secure the right to vote, tend instinctively to see those voter ID laws as an attempt at voter suppression. They look familiar. But I accept that there are others who do not feel that way, who believe that, in fact, protecting the sanctity of the ballot is so important. I mean, in fact, I had this argument with one of my very best friends 3 nights ago. So people can disagree. And we're going to have to learn to disagree civilly. We're going to talk about a lot of hard stuff here. And it's going to be good practice for us to do it, because we're going to be asking our students to talk about some hard stuff. When you send your students home to interview their grandparents, where were you in Macomb, Mississippi in 1961? Or in Natchez in 1965, or in any number of Claiborne County. When you do that, some stuff's going to come back that's going to be a little complicated for you to negotiate in the classroom. Now, sometimes the grandmother was walking out of Bergland High School or sitting in, and it's quite possible in some cases that the grandfather was planting sticks of dynamite outside of Freedom House or a church. So this year's going to cut pretty close to the bone. And so we have to be able to talk about difficult issues of race, which are the issues that Americans have the hardest time knowing how to even begin to converse about. And yet, we need to be able to do that, but we need to be able to do that respectfully and understanding that different people see and understand their worlds in different ways. All right. I am now going to try to give you a whirlwind tour of 2 decades of American history and get us up to the eve of Freedom Summer in 1964. And I'm not going to get there, but let's give it a try. Can I get maybe one of the lights shut on?
Yeah.
I don't want to make it so you can't read. Can you guys still make notes and stuff out of it? You guys know what that is, I'm sure. Soviet and American soldiers at the conclusion of the Second World War, greeting one another. I think this is at the Elbe River, but my German geography is not very good. A moment, and a fleeting moment, in which the Grand Alliance celebrated the destruction of the Nazi machine. But this era of good feelings didn't last. The Soviet Army, the Soviet Union, having been pushed back early in the war and having advanced right up to Berlin, didn't leave after 1945. And depending on how you wish to tell the story, the American Army didn't really leave either. And here we see the geography of what would become the Cold War, or the heartland of the Cold War, because ultimately the Cold War itself would become global. And some of the places, as you know, it actually became a hot war in places in Africa and Asia, as these two competing ideological and political blocs competed for, as they said, the hearts and minds of the world's darker races. This is a famous speech in Fulton, Missouri. I think this is in your textbook, of Winston Churchill, recently defeated as Prime Minister of Great Britain after the end of the Second World War. There's Harry Truman. Churchill famously creating an image that is still with us. There is an iron curtain descending across Europe. American foreign policy for the next 4 decades and more was essentially conditioned by the Cold War, a period which saw the emergence of a massive security state, the growth of a large federally funded defense complex, what a Republican president, Dwight Eisenhower, warned us was a military-industrial complex, a series of crises from around the world, from Berlin. Well, mercifully, this was the shadow, of course, that overhung this entire period. Crises from Berlin. Here you see the Soviet Union, or East German troops building what would be the Berlin Wall. I think this is 1961. To stop the exodus of East Germans into the Allied zone. A year later, U-2 overflights of Cuba found evidence of nuclear missile installations on the island of Cuba, just 90 miles off the shores of Florida. We now know, because of declassified documents, that we came so much closer to a nuclear exchange in October 1962 than we imagined that it is stunning. In fact, on the particular day this is a longer conversation. But the point is that history hung on a knife edge during those 13 days. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes the Cold War became a hot war. In Korea, and even more powerfully in terms of American politics, in a country that prior to the war most Americans couldn't have found on a map, called Vietnam.